10 years ago, my mum came to visit me in Ireland, and because she loved exploring new places, particularly graveyards, she decided to go to see the famous Glasnevin Cemetery. But what she ended up experiencing there that day would stay with her for a really long time. Now, I've never told this story ever before, so you're going to be the first ones to hear it. Ready? Let's dive in. Back in 2011, I packed my 2 suitcases and my dance dress and decided to move to Dublin. And why? Well, back then, I was living and breathing for the sport that I picked up several years before that, and that was Irish dancing. Now, back then, it was sort of becoming popular in the country, but that wasn't really the reason why I really liked it so much. No, as it turned out, I was quite good at it. I was winning all these trophies across Europe. I even scored a medal at a major competition in Ireland, which made me the first female dancer from Europe to ever do it. But on top of this, I got to travel all over the place, meet all these new people. And my mum, well, she would often travel with me, so we got to make some really amazing memories together. So when the time came and I had to decide, what to do after my A-levels, I didn't enroll in any university just like everyone else did. No, instead, I made the decision to relocate to Dublin because I was just so set on my dance career. But sadly, this story doesn't really have a happy ending, because just a few short years in, my back decided to give in, and so I had to retire completely. I can't really say how much that hurt at the time. Firstly, I was in literal pain every day. I was basically crippled. I couldn't walk, I couldn't stand. I couldn't even do the simple exercises the doctors told me to do. But on top of it, the one constant in my life, the thing I loved the most, well, it was just gone. Just like that, like overnight. And it would take me a really long time to get back to the point of where I could move again. And that is when I decided to, maybe it was time to go back to uni. And that's when I picked psychology. And this is definitely one of the reasons, I'm here today telling you all these stories, because I've always been really fascinated by all things connected to psychology. So, a few years into my studies, my mom comes over to visit me. She would usually come over like twice a year and spend about 3 or 4 weeks at my place. But honestly, most of the time, I didn't even know that she was there, because all she did was basically get up in the morning, get ready for the day, and then go out and explore the whole place, and then come back in the evening. And that was pretty much all she did every single day, no matter the weather. Now, I do have a pretty good idea as to why she has been like this. You see, most of the year she would be actually tied to the family business, and that meant that she was working 7 days a week with maybe 4 to 6 hours sleep every night. And so she never really had any time to herself, never mind going out for a walk. And so when she finally got the time off, all she wanted to be is just be out there exploring the place and seeing all these amazing things the city had to offer. And Dublin was a great place to do just that. It's definitely not the largest of cities out there. In fact, it is quite small. But that doesn't matter because it's packed with all sorts of things that Mum really enjoys. There's all the Celtic history. There are a lot of these old castles just dotted all over the place. There are plenty of rocks and cliffs she really enjoys. And the whole country has this beautiful green scenery. And on top of this, the Irish people are still among the friendliest we've ever come across. And the food is pretty decent too. But there is one more thing that interests my mom above all of these other things. And that's graveyards, cemeteries, and churches. But a bit of context here. When my mom was a young girl, herself and her best friend used to get into these morgue houses that were part of the old cemeteries, to store those bodies in. Now, by that point, these morgues didn't really have any bodies left, but they were still pretty spooky. So basically every single sound my mom and her friend would hear would really scare them. But they didn't break into these places, to cause any trouble or havoc. No, not at all. They just wanted to be left alone, just to play. And they knew that this was one of the places that nobody would come and disturb them. And so over the years, Mum developed this liking for anything to do with churches, cemeteries, and all graveyards. Because actually, they tend to be a pretty peaceful place to be. And, well, as it happens, Dublin has a good few of those. So one day, Mum decides to go and visit the most famous place one can be buried in Ireland, the Glasnevin Cemetery. This place was established back in 1832 with the burial of an 11-year-old boy called Michael Carey. This boy was one of the few hundreds of victims of tuberculosis, which was sweeping through the nations back then, and so soon he would be joined by many others. But over time, this place became very popular, and there are even a good number of prominent names that have been laid to rest there. Like, for example, the singer from Dubliners, Luke Kelly, a political leader, Daniel O'Connell, or a writer and a painter, Christy Brown. And so with all of this popularity, the cemetery began to grow and grow. And this day, it's really huge. There's about 1.5 million graves, with maybe another 800 unmarked ones. But despite its size, the cemetery is actually being carefully looked after, and so it's kept in a really good state at all times. In fact, it's so nice that many people just go there, as part of their daily walks, and they treat it like a park because of how beautiful and peaceful it is. And so that day, my mom sets off and goes to the place to see it herself. Now, for some reason, it took her a little bit longer to get there, so she didn't actually arrive before 5 p.m. Now, usually this really wouldn't be an issue, apart from the fact that you could be in a graveyard past dark, but this particular cemetery gets locked up every night. Now, the times of when that happens differs, but that day it was going to be 6 p.m, so mom only had 1 hour. But because this is my mom we're talking about, nothing was going to stop her from going in. She was so excited to be there, and as she was getting near the big gates, she could see the glimpse of what was laying behind them. And so when the staff told her that they would be closing soon, she didn't really mind. So she picked up a map, because my mom loves a good old-fashioned map, and as she was looking at the layout of the whole cemetery, she decided that she would first go to see what is probably the most famous landmark of the entire place, the O'Connell Tower, because Daniel O'Connell, that political figure, is buried right underneath it in the crypt. But in my opinion, that is not what's most interesting about this whole tower, because the tower is actually located within the circle of tombs where other famous people are buried. And as you're going around them, you can actually see into some of them as well. Now, if you've ever heard of Glasnevin Cemetery, you will know exactly the place I'm talking about, because that is exactly what is put on all of the brochures, flyers. It's posted all over social media. It's the most famous shot of the entire place. So mom is going around the tombs, looking in where she could. And after she's finished with the lab, she looks at the map back again and sees that there's this line of trees alongside one part of the cemetery. So folding the map away, she decides to go there next. And when she does, she's immediately taken aback by how beautiful it is. The trees form almost like a tight tunnel of branches, and you can see more gravesites just beyond them. And again, it's one of those places that people tend to take a picture of it the most, just because of how unusual and well manicured it is. And as mom gets out of the farther side of it, she sees that to her left, there's this open field of smaller gravestones. At first she thinks that it's just another part of the cemetery, but when she sees a few families sitting around having picnic, she sort of stops and looks at one of the gravestones, and she immediately realizes what that place actually is. That part of Glasnevin Cemetery is called the Angel's Plot, and it is where about 40,000 stillborn and infant babies have been laid to rest. Now, a lot of them are in shared or communal graves, but there are actually a lot of plots of individual headstones, like the one my mom was looking at. And those families, having picnics out there, well, those are just grieving families who decided to visit their little ones' graves and make a full day out of it. And you really have to keep an open mind about this, because I can't even imagine how traumatic it must be to lose a child. And so by including them in your day out like that, well, it might be just the type of the coping mechanism those families needed. So leaving this plot behind, mom decides that she would go and investigate what lies beyond. And just slightly to the right, she sees a line of older looking trees with more headstones beneath them. But these look older and are definitely in more of a fragile state. Some of those headstones have chunks of missing stone of them that's just lying around the place. And the trees, the roots are protruding from the earth. And there's all of these leaves lying around. So mom really has to be looking as to where she's stepping so she doesn't trip. But again, she doesn't mind this, because this is exactly the kind of spot she likes the most. And as she's looking around, there also seems to be nobody else but her there. It's not like the cemetery was packed that day at all, but there were still people, walking around the place, but not this spot. And so Mom, she sees that she's on her own. She decides to go deeper and see what the place is really about. Sometimes she steps by a particular grave, but she quickly finds out that a lot of them are actually illegible and quite weathered. They're quite old. But either way, she's continuing on because she really likes the fact that the place is just so quiet and serene. But that would soon change. All of a sudden, Mom's ears go completely deaf. The only way she's really been able to describe it to me was that feeling when you get when you're landing on a plane. Except that there was literally no reason whatsoever for her to be feeling this way. The weather didn't change. There were no planes, flying overhead. There was no thunderstorm coming, nothing like that at all. But there she is, Mom frozen on the spot, not being able to hear anything at all. But that wasn't the end of it. Literally out of nowhere, she feels a hand being placed on her left shoulder. All panicked, she quickly turns around to face that person who did this. But when she does, she sees nothing. There's nobody there. Now, there was no chance that even if someone did just pull a prank on her, that they would have the time to, go and duck behind some tree or a headstone. Like, this was literally impossible. But then all of a sudden, her ears go back to normal again. And so Mom wastes no time and she begins speed walking out of the part of the cemetery. And as she reaches the entrance plot again, she begins hearing this distant bell ringing. And at first, she's really confused as to what this really might be. But then she gets it. She quickly glances at her watch and sees that it's 5:55 p.m. So she only has 5 minutes to get back to the main gate and get out of there before she gets locked in for the night. Now, this actually wouldn't be completely unheard of. I'm not sure if they do now, but back then, they definitely didn't keep a track of how many people entered and exited throughout the day. So, if someone did stray into a far corner of the cemetery and didn't hear the bell, just like my mom hadn't, well, they would realize it was well past the closing time only when it was too late. And if the staff left on the clock, like many do, oh boy, would they be in a lot of trouble. So at this point, Mom is walking as fast as she can towards the gate, which, by the way, at this point was still more than 5 minutes away. But she pushes forward no matter what, and soon she actually sees the gate. But the staff are locking it. So Mom starts yelling at them like, "Hey, I'm still here." And luckily they see her, they wait for her, and they let her out. Now, to this day, Mom is convinced that the ghost she met at the cemetery was no evil entity. No, instead she thinks that it was actually there to help her, because it made her turn around and safely get out. Now, interestingly, the Glasnevin Cemetery is actually supposed to be one of the most haunted places in Ireland. And because this actually isn't the first time my mom had a run-in with something supernatural, I totally believe her. In fact, my mom has always been more sensitive to this sort of energy. And there's actually plenty of more stories she had told me over the years. So if this is something that you would also like to hear about, then let me know in the comments. Happy Halloween, and I'll see you next week with 3 true horror stories from one of the most mysterious places on Earth, North Korea. Until next time.